Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, the podcast for teachers who don't want to just survive teaching, but actually thrive. I am your host, Kim Lapre, and I am really happy to have you here today. This is going to be a different kind of episode than we're used to, so buckle up. This is one that I've been sitting on for a while because it's complicated and I don't have a neat answer wrapped up with a bow, but I think it's a conversation or, dare I say, a rant that we need to have anyway. So we're going to have it today. Now, many of you that I've been teaching for 24 years, first as a band director and then as a middle school English teacher. During my time as a band director, I hate to admit that grading wasn't a really big deal to me because I didn't fully understand the impact that it could have. But once I switched over to English, I really had to stumble through grading because I couldn't find a method that felt right. I didn't want my grade book to just be an average of numbers like it was when I started out with English. I wanted to be able to look at a student's grade and clearly communicate areas of strength and areas of growth. And while my own approach to grading has evolved, it feels like the grading landscape in many ways has devolved. And for so many of us, the role and value of grades have turned into somewhat of a battleground, and it's one that teachers have been losing. Now, more and more of us, including myself, are asking the same question. What are grades actually communicating anymore? Like, what are they even good for anymore? So, today I want to talk honestly about grading, where it came from, where it's gone, and why so many teachers feel stuck between doing what they believe is right and doing what feels easiest just to get through the school year. And I'm going to tell you up front, though, I don't have a solution at the end of this episode. I'll share what I'm doing and why. But more than anything, I want to start this conversation, one that we need to have. And by we, I absolutely mean myself. So if you're at all amenable to the style of ranting episode, it's not going to be one of my peppy, hopeful episodes. Be sure to let me know in the comments. And by giving this episode a like or a thumbs up, subscribe if you can, and of course, let me know where you stand on the state of grading after you've listened through this. So, before we talk about how I feel grading has gone off the rails in some places, I'm going to give you a little bit of a history, especially for newer teachers, and also as a refresher for those of you who have been teaching for a while, because none of this started out as unreasonable. So, let's start with like grading pre 2000s, back in the day. And this is probably what you experienced if you were in school back then. I know that some of the teachers now, the newer teachers, you weren't quite in school before 2000. For decades, grading was largely based on like the accumulation of points, right? And it emphasized compliance. The problem with that is that grades were doing too many jobs at once because it's supposed to be communicating learning, but a lot of times it was also used to manage behavior and it could be biased towards the quote unquote good kids. And then it tended to reward responsibility. So over time, educators started asking a very valid question. What exactly is a grade supposed to communicate? Should my class with a large group of disruptive students have lower grades than the class with the little angels? What does that say about those students learning? But more importantly, what does it say about us as teachers? And this is ultimately what convinced me to adopt the standards-based grading model. All right, so fast forward to like early to mid 2000s, we started talking about standards-based learning and grading for learning. And this is where a huge grading reform began. So there were books like Grading for Learning by Ken O'Connor. I still have mine, second edition, green cover that I got at a professional development. And his philosophy was this: grades should reflect what students know and can do. Behavior and work habits should be reported separately, not in the main grade. And feedback should matter more than the accumulation of points. And learning should be prioritized over compliance. I want to know what my students can and can't do just by looking at their grades. It also communicated to students where they were in terms of learning, and it made it easier to explain to a parent why their student didn't earn a certain grade. It's not because Johnny is only worthy of a C, it's because Johnny does C level work. Johnny is getting C's on these skills, right? And so then grades could be more of a tool for learning rather than just like this sort of like final judgment about the student. Fast forward to around 2010, this idea really took off. And now districts were like, we are going to adopt this because this sounds awesome. It's even more about clear learning targets that define the skill. We want the students to know this is what you're aiming for when you do this particular assignment. And then we started to talk more about proficiency scales, 4, 3, 2, 1. We incorporated more structured feedback cycles to help students move up the scale. And so we give the students the feedback, they apply the feedback, and then we evaluate to see did they move up that scale. And of course, that means reassessment opportunities, which allows students to give us new evidence of their learning, which is different than just like retaking a test over and over and over again until they get it right. And also it established like clear windows of opportunity for those retakes or reassessments. So it wasn't just like an indefinite amount of time that students could redo this. They had to do it really close to when the lesson was actually taught. So again, grading for learning, we never made it about like having fewer expectations for the students because we are grading it in a different way, but it was just meant to really focus on clearer expectations and then create this system, taking them from where they're at and moving them to grade level. Fast forward a little more now to grading for equity. That's where we're at. Before I dive into that, let me know in the comments if you can. Do you remember all of that? Were you around for standards-based grading? Did you try to adopt it? How did it go? I'm super curious, okay? It was something that was introduced in my district, but we have a lot of autonomy in terms of how we grade in my district, so not a lot of teachers necessarily adopted it. So I'm just curious. So now, grading for equity. The language and the scope shifted. A lot of this stemmed from the fact that for years, even with grading for learning, standards-based grading, the data showed persistent gaps in test scores, graduation rates, discipline, and even having access to advanced coursework. And this was along like racial, socioeconomic, language, and disability lines. Grading reform was again being discussed in a different lens. And so now it was turning into sort of like this moral issue and not just a pedagogical issue. In 2020, a couple things happened simultaneously. I'm sure you can guess one of them, and this matters. So, obviously, COVID, which disrupted school unevenly for students, meaning that not all students experienced the same pandemic. And so then teachers, we were suddenly grading partial participation. Like we graded for when the students did show up. I couldn't really penalize them for not showing up because there could be factors outside of their control. Then, to add on top of that, after the killing of George Floyd, many institutions, including school districts, publicly committed to examining systemic inequities. But in education, this translated into questions like, are our grading practices neutral and fair, or do they actually advantage certain students? Are we penalizing instability instead of measuring learning? That's a big one. And still, do grades reflect skill or does it reflect access to support? And these are really big questions because a lot of our students and we saw this during the pandemic, they don't have access to support. They do live unstable lives. And so what's going on with our grading? How is our grading aligning with that? And districts were under pressure to show commitment to equity and reduce failure rates, address disparities in the outcomes of the students based on what was happening at home. So, grading policies became one of the fastest levers to pull to address all of these things. I mean, it's easier to change than curriculum because we know curriculum is expensive, it's a moneymaker. It's easier than adjusting the staffing and properly training teachers. It's easier and less expensive than decreasing class sizes to allow teachers to offer more support to these students. And it's easier than trying to find creative ways to fund additional supports and programs to help mitigate those factors. I mean, it's just like, oh, we can just change grading policies because somehow that's going to fix the issue. So then grading moved from this instructional practice to an equity issue. And works like Grading for Equity by Joe Feldman reframed grading now as a justice issue. And equity grading, it's not too far different from grading for learning, but here's some nuances. They want grades to be more accurate, where grades equals learning and not life management. Again, just like with grading for learning, equity grading was meant to remove behavior and compliance from grades. So things like attendance, participation, bringing supplies, so that the grades actually reflect achievement because those are factors that we can't control. Another nuance with grading for equity, again, is supposed to be more bias resistant. So, again, the argument is that when we grade behaviors like timeliness and participation, we may unintentionally grade things like cultural norms, home stability, language barriers, a disability, work responsibilities. Grading for equity was supposed to be more motivating, keeping hope up through math. So this is where that 50% minimum and no zeros ideas came from. So on a scale of 0 to 100, an F can cover a huge range. I don't know what an F is for you. For some people, it's between like 0% up to 59%, and then 60% becomes the D minus. But it makes a single zero disproportionately destructive when the grades are averaged. So it creates like this huge hole that some students, they just can't see themselves trying to dig themselves out of. It's just, to them, it's like, what's the point? Right? It's, I'm so far behind. What's the point? I want to be clear that I'm not denying that systemic inequities exist. I am a staunch believer that they do, and I'm really upset about the revisionist history that is happening in our textbooks and in curriculums. Yeah, that's another conversation for another day. Okay, they affect students' ability to perform and participate and even persist in school. But what I am questioning is whether grading policies are the right way to address those inequities, because look at what has happened when we ask grades to compensate for conditions that we actually can't change. So here's the thing, this is where the system completely went off the rails. So the goal wasn't supposed to be quote unquote free points, but districts implemented it in ways that felt like free points. I mean, that minimum 50, it sure feels like free points, especially when it's applied to missing work rather than just like work that they at least attempted. And many teachers then experience reduced motivation because when you're going to get a 50%, it just dilutes accountability. Students see that they can just skip an assignment and magically get points for it. It's like not going to work and still getting paid for it. Across districts, and especially in the stories that teachers are sharing online, the pattern is pretty consistent. Pretty much everyone passes. An A is actually no longer exceptional, it's expected, right? And failing grades are discouraged, they're questioned. Oof, boy, are they questioned, or they're just quietly reversed. And when this happens, we know that grades are no longer primarily communicating what a student knows or can do. They're just communicating that the student was on our roster, right? So the shift went from demonstrating mastery to fulfilling or trying to reach particular outcomes, aka higher passing and graduation rates to demonstrate equity. And districts now want teacher compliance by pressuring them to keep those numbers up. And this is where many teachers are feeling this breaking point, especially when it comes to grading, because they're being told to just change the grade. And failing grades, they're requiring this extensive justification and even sometimes an individualized plan for a particular student to show how the teacher is going to help that student pass, even though the student didn't even do the initial work at all. And then also then being asked to do better to ensure that more students pass. And then graduation or promotion rates are being folded into these grading conversations. And so grading isn't just about learning anymore. And while administrators are probably not explicitly saying, we want you to lie about student learning, they're kind of suggesting that, right? They're suggesting these grade changes passive aggressively by saying things like, are you sure the student really deserves an F? And what can you do to help them pass? What are the steps you took to ensure that they learn the material? How could your classroom management or teaching style have affected these outcomes? How could have it maybe caused them to fail? And over time, teachers are just saying pretty much that their professional judgment doesn't matter anymore. And of course, this has been a trend in general, but especially when it comes to grading. I mean, they have to do what they know is unethical sometimes because one, they're being told to, and their job could be on the line, and or two, it's just easier than putting up a fight with admin or even worse, like an angry parent. And speaking of parents, many of them have become emboldened by these policies because now they know what's up. I mean, that's not to say that this is the first time that parents have strong arm teachers for a better grade. I mean, this has happened like forever, but it's becoming more and more prevalent, and the tactics are just different now. Parents have caught on to this shift in many grading systems, and a lot of them have responded by disputing any grade that is lower than what they feel their child deserves. And teachers are increasingly describing parents demanding things like a detailed justification for every low grade. And in some cases, teachers have even presented clear evidence of in class work that the student refused to do, homework that the student chose not to complete, only to be told that the class was too boring, the teacher didn't remind the student enough, and that the student shouldn't be responsible for managing their own work. I mean, the responsibility for effort, for follow through, and even behavior, it's increasingly being transferred away from the student, away from the parent, and now it's placed squarely on our shoulders as teachers. So, once again, grades are no longer about learning. Now they become evaluations of the teacher's performance, our performance as a motivator, an entertainer, a personal assistant to make sure they get their assignments done on time, and sometimes even as a surrogate parent. It's exhausting. It's exhausting. And ironically and sadly, the ones who are hurt the most by all of these decisions that these adults have made are the students. Because when grades stop meaning what they're supposed to mean, students notice and adjust accordingly. I mean, I talked about this in episode 144. The students are watching. Students stop seeing them as feedback and start seeing grades as guarantees. Like learning becomes optional because the outcome has already been predetermined. I'm going to pass, whether or not I learn the information. And this is where that apathy and the learned helplessness has set in. This has been happening across the country. Because why invest any kind of effort if deadlines are flexible and reassessments are unlimited? If I'm not in the mood today to do this properly, I can just retake it when I am in the mood. Missing work, I still get credit for it. And if not, someone will intervene later. And so now students are of the mindset, how little can I do and still pass? Now, obviously, these are broad generalizations, but we know that with every passing year, we are seeing a larger percentage of students with this mindset. And that's why the shock is so intense when students encounter college or workplace standards again. And not because they're incapable, but because the rules are what they're supposed to be. The rules suddenly change back. Accountability finally matters. And these students, they go back and they tell their teachers and also online that they go to college and they're shocked by the fact that professors are holding firm deadlines, that maybe they'll have a retake, maybe. Professors aren't willing to negotiate the grades, and consequences aren't actually softened by explanations. It's just like, you didn't pass. That's it. Yes, you missed the comma. You lost 10 points for missing a comma. No, you didn't cite your evidence properly. That's plagiarism. Now you get 25% taken off. And actually, I've even seen college students admitting in various online forums that it was so easy to get an A in high school, and now they're struggling so much in college. And a lot of them wrote about being unprepared for the expectations and even rigor of college, and how their struggles have really affected their mental health. And trade schools and even employers, they are reporting similar gaps, and not in intelligence, but in work habits, difficulty persisting through boring or difficult tasks. That's kind of what entry level jobs are. And again, it's not because the students are incapable, and it's not because those high school teachers failed. I want to make that clear. It's not the teachers who failed, it's the grading system that was forced upon them. It was the fact that students, year after year, post pandemic, have come to each grade level so behind and unprepared that there was only so much that we could do to catch them up. Even though we couldn't fill those gaps, we are still required to pass them. So I understand why some teachers right now, they pad their grade books with participation points. They're like, I can't do standards based grading. So many students are so far behind that they would fail. So they're just going to add points for showing up and being there. And I understand why a student who is maybe like 0.1% from passing just kind of gets nudged over the line into passing. Not because they demonstrated any form of mastery, but because the alternative is another meeting, another email chain, and another round of being questioned about your professionalism. I mean, teaching is hard enough. And at some point, we're just trying to survive. And it just outweighs principle. And I don't say that with judgment. I I get it. I'm there. I feel it, right? And in my own classroom, how I try to avoid all of this. I mean, yes, we do have a lot of autonomy, like I mentioned in my district, but that doesn't keep high maintenance parents away. So my grade book is actually fairly sparse, and most of what I assess and put into the grade book is tied directly to standards and skills. And students, they can revise and redo work based on my feedback anytime. I have a very generous late policy, but the truth is, most students don't use it. I also know grade behavior, at least not in what we call the scholarship grade. We have citizenship grade, and that's where you can grade behavior and attendance. I don't factor in compliance or likability either. I believe in the premise of standards based and equity based grading. I really, really do. But like many things that start with good intentions, it's just been stretched and simplified for me and diluted a bit so that I can make it work and so that teaching can still be sustainable. And here's the part that I'm still sitting with though. I don't know if the system can be fixed. I don't know. In some ways, it's like how prices have been going up. We know this inflation, but we know that they're not going to go back down. Once everyone gets comfortable spending a certain amount on food at a restaurant, that just kind of becomes the norm, right? And inflated grades are probably just going to be the new norm. A 4.0 used to actually mean something. And now 4.0 people scoff at the high school level because what, you're not taking 10 AP classes and getting an A plus in there. You don't have like a 4.9 or a 5.0. So then the question becomes pretty uncomfortable but unavoidable. If grades don't motivate learning anymore, then what does? Honestly, if we eliminate grades entirely and we rely on evaluations and rubrics and feedback, then how do we motivate students to practice multiplication tables, to memorize basic facts, to write essays about topics they don't care about, to read novels when TikTok, gaming, or AI offer instant reward with zero struggle? I mean, students have been trained now by systems that are larger than schools to expect payment for their effort. So if we take grades away, we have to be honest about what's going to replace it. Because I've heard some people suggest that we take it away, but I just feel like students are going to want that payment, that grade, for putting forth any effort, even though they get a grade for no effort. They still want something. I know it's been a long episode, but I really want us to have this conversation. I think it's important. I think you think it's important because I keep hearing about it and it hasn't gotten any better. So leave a comment, whether you're like on Spotify or on YouTube. If you're not, you can leave me an email or you can hop onto one of those platforms and leave a comment too. So thanks for being here with me today, and I will see you next time.